right, welcome back to At Your Peak, talking fundamentals and fundamental leadership this week. And we've explored a number of great characters that have distinguished himself in the Bible. We've mentioned everything from, of course, Jesus to Caleb, to Nehemiah and Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And yesterday we touched a little bit about Daniel. I'd like to drive that thought a little bit deeper today. And some of the great character as a leader, Daniel learned how to serve crazy mad kings extraordinarily well. This speaks to you the power of being a number two. Maybe you're in an organization where you're not the main guy or main lady that leads, and you're having to do what they call leading up and make suggestions. I mean, Daniel found himself in some fierce environments where if you say the wrong thing or give the king the wrong look, off with your head. It wasn't just you're fired, it meant you're dead. They would kill you. So Daniel was an extraordinary human being, and he was the sum of extraordinary habits. He had very successful habits. And yesterday I talked a little bit about his ethic. He didn't have situational ethics. He was rock solid steady. He was always passing tests. But the thing that I think is interesting that I want to drive further is he did a lifestyle that was disciplined, and he did little things exceptionally well. And he was consistent in cultivating habits that served him well later on. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you about today. Successful leaders doing ordinary things extraordinarily well. The Bible says he had an extraordinary spirit. So let's understand, before the word influencer was a buzzword in culture, Daniel was an influencer. He was influencing, he rose through the ranks. He was a figure. He was a person of God that was in a pagan culture. Many of you know the story, they were in captivity, in exile. The people of God had a history of doing good with God, then betraying God, worshiping other gods, then other countries would come in, invade, take over, then they would go into captivity. It was this horrible cycle until Jesus came and redeemed all of us. But if you read the Old Testament, this was kind of the up-down nature of the people of God. And Daniel was in this situation where he's in a city he didn't want to be in with people he didn't want to serve. He would probably much rather have been in his own country serving his own people with his own king. But that's not the way it was. And so he's having to serve mad kings several times over who were prideful, arrogant, and would be willing to kill him just like that. But Daniel's an influencer. He's also very principled, as we mentioned. And he did things consistently throughout his narrative, from doing little things well, bringing suggestions. He was very wise. He was learned. He would study things. He did the behind-the-scenes work. He was an achiever. And see, non-achievers become jealous of a Daniel type because they want the status that Daniel got without Daniel's character. See, Daniel put in the work. Daniel led by example. Daniel had great character. But the non-achievers around him were jealous of his status, of him rising through the ranks. They didn't want his discipline or his character, his competency, his consistency, or his capacity. They didn't have that. So his haters, they leveraged the king's ego against Daniel's prayer habits. Boy, that really sent them crazy. They're like, oh yeah, he's one of those Bible-thumping prayer people. And look at him go. And who does he think he is? And, that whole deal. So Daniel just stays consistent. He's in tune with his God. So these guys who are jealous say, you know what, let's do this. Let's hit him right where it hurts. Let's get the king to sign a decree that everybody should worship him, the king. That'll trap Daniel because he always prays to his God consistently all the time. Well, Daniel has seen this movie before. He's seen it played out before. This is nothing new. He's had people try to set him up his whole corporate career. I'm talking to somebody in the corporate culture right now. It's the same scenario, different king, different boss. We move to Daniel chapter 6, verse 10. Now, when Daniel knew that this document to worship this mad king, well, he wasn't mad, but he was arrogant. He was like, he's definitely arrogant if he wants to be worshiped. So when Daniel knew that the document was signed to worship this king, he entered his house, which is now in his roof chamber. It had windows opening towards Jerusalem. Here's what he did. He continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously. That's the key phrase. He had been consistently doing that. He had a lifestyle of being on his knees. And man, that'll preach. It's one thing to be on your knees in a crisis. It's another thing to be on your knees before the crisis ever hits. Sometimes you'll define what's defined in you happens to you and through you before it ever gets to you. He had a response before the crisis ever came. And his response was, I am on my knees. I am dialed in, connecting with the source of all wisdom. It's a good habit to have. Verse 16, then the king gave the orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. And the king spoke and said to Daniel, oh man, your God whom you constantly serve, he's going to deliver you. I just think that's amazing. So this pagan king who demanded that people worship him because he signed a decree saying, yeah, have everybody worship me, didn't think it through. Daniel's boss didn't think it through, and that'll preach to somebody in the business culture. Sometimes leaders, when you're serving somebody above you in leadership who didn't think it through, it may cost you something and you may get thrown into a lion's den, but that boss, that leader who threw you to the lions accidentally because he didn't think it through, like Darius who didn't think it through, you may pay the price, but there's something on the other side of it. Well, what is amazing is this king says to Daniel, this pagan king who doesn't know God at all, he says, oh yeah, I didn't think it through. I'm so sorry, Daniel. I can't believe I did this to you. By the way, I'm going to prophesy this. Your God's going to deliver you. Well, he does. So this Daniel enjoys success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. God delivers him. You know the story. And by the way, the guys that set him up, they got thrown to the lions. Oh, wow. See, Daniel wasn't driven by success. If he was, he wouldn't have made it past the lion's den because he would have compromised. He was driven to serve God. It wasn't about the mad kings. It was about being a great leader to the Lord himself. Darius, Nebuchadnezzar, whoever it was, Cyrus, whoever, it doesn't matter what king it was. He worked under the Lord. See, God isn't testing you so he can see what you'll do. He already knows what you're going to do. God's testing you. And he tested Daniel so that you and I, like Daniel, can see what's actually in you. He's testing you so you can see what's in you. Question to ponder here. How can you start cultivating a lifestyle of consistent habits? Maybe it's in prayer, the reading of the Word, the Bible. Maybe it's reading leadership books. What can you do, the little things, that can cultivate a lifestyle consistency that you can lean on in times of testing? Habits that are life-giving. And where does Daniel's story currently reflect yours? Where are you in that narrative? Better yet, are there areas of Daniel's life that he's winning at that you aren't? Take a moment to reflect on that. Good leaders do reflection, and they decide, where can I grow to be more like him?